In this episode, I'm going to give you 3 tips that you can use to handle crowd pressure. Now, before I get into those 3 tips, I want to briefly explain why the pressure from the crowd hurts you, and so what effect it has on your mindset. And the first effect it has is that it causes your attention to drift, and this is where we're going to see the other 2 problems stem from. So when you are playing in front of a big crowd, or a crowd that is booing you or talking a lot of trash, this can cause your attention to drift from being fully focused on what you're doing as an athlete, and then it starts to become focused on the crowd. And this is where we'll see a difference between practices and games, right? Because during games, there isn't as much crowd pressure, so you're able to just focus on what you're doing. And then the more you begin to think about the crowd, because they distract you with their words, maybe they upset you, maybe you start to just worry about what they're thinking, this pulls you out of the moment. And so the other 2 challenges that this drift of your focus and attention causes are trying to impress the crowd. And this is one that happens when you're playing in front of people that you know, maybe some friends, maybe some family. And so you're starting to think more about, I want to impress them. And so then you're going to start trying too hard to play well, which I know sounds weird, right? Because obviously you always want to try hard to play well. But when you try too hard to play well, this is where we can find you forcing a good performance instead of just allowing it to happen. And the other challenge is that when you focus on the crowd so much, especially if they're a crowd that is booing you and you really want to prove them wrong, it can be easy to play not to fail. And this is where we'll see timid play become a problem. So the 3 tips that I have for you work to keep your focus off of the crowd and make sure that you're still playing freely like you do during practice and freely like you do when you're playing in front of a crowd who isn't putting as much pressure on you. And so the first tip is that you want to keep your goals simple. Because as I just said, when we're worried so much about the crowd and we try to impress them or we try not to fail, our goals become bigger than they need to be. Honestly, they become more complicated than they need to be. Let's take the example of a basketball player. If you're a basketball player, the crowd will affect you greatly because it's typically a smaller arena and the crowd is closer to the court. And if they're putting a lot of pressure on you for whatever reason, you may start to feel like you have to play perfectly. So now your goal is, I have to play perfectly. Or, I'm going to score 30 points today to prove them wrong. So now you're focused on how many points you need to score and how you need to make every basket. We want to keep our goals simple. This is true when we're dealing with crowd pressure, and it's also true when we're dealing with the pressure because of the situation within a game. And an example of this comes from a player that I was talking to last week in one-on-one coaching, which if you are interested in learning more about my one-on-one coaching program, I'll put a link to that in the description below. But he was talking to me about a pressure situation that he was feeling during a game recently, and how during that pressure moment, he started to think more about the outcome, how he needed to come up clutch for his team, make the big shot. And so I then asked him, what is different about that situation? He naturally said the pressure. And then I was asking him, okay, well, what's different about the actual situation during the game? Don't think about the moment. Don't think about the crowd. What's different about the game itself? And he thought for a moment and he said, well, nothing's different. The game is the same. And that's the point behind keeping our goals simple. We often make the moment bigger than it needs to be because of the crowd or because of the pressure we feel due to the circumstances of the moment. But the truth is, in order to succeed, the same principles apply. You need to get yourself into an open position. You need to be calm and relaxed with your shot. You need to be quick with your shot. If you play another sport, the recipe for success will be the same no matter how much pressure you feel because the game itself doesn't change. So when you're feeling pressure from the crowd, keep your goals simple and keep your goals controllable. For example, what's maybe one thing you need to do in order to play well? What are the 1 to 2 process goals you want to set for the game? Really work against thinking big in terms of, I need to prove everybody wrong, or I need to shut them up by playing well. If that's motivating for you, that's great, but if you struggle with crowd pressure, that's probably not motivating for you. So you want to keep your goals as simple as possible when you play to avoid this tendency to try to force a good performance or to even try not to fail. So that's tip number 1. Make sure that you're keeping your goals simple and controllable. Tip number 2 is whenever you do feel this pressure during the actual game, you want to center yourself with your breath. When it comes to performing your best, so what we could call peak performance, it always happens when you're fully present in the moment. But what happens when you're focused on the crowd? Are you present, or is your mind distracted? And you start to think about that last mistake you made, or you start to think about the last time you played in front of a crowd like that and how you performed poorly. Or maybe you're thinking about how you want them to leave the court or the arena or the field really impressed with how you played and feeling stupid for having talked trash to you throughout the game. When you're thinking that way, your mind is not present on the game. And there's really no way for you to perform your best if you're performing with a mind in the past or the future. So you have to keep yourself present. And the simple goals that I was mentioning in tip number 1, they'll help you stay present because it gives you, or those goals give you something concrete to focus on in the moment. But above anything else, if you can center yourself with your breath, even just a simple deep breath throughout the game, whether it's before the at-bat, before the serve, before you go onto the court if you're a basketball player, when there's a stoppage of play, if you're a soccer player, if somebody's injured, or even just when you're running up and down the field, if you can just center your attention with your breath. It's going to take everything from being, so big and your attention being all on the crowd and their noise and everything like that, and it's going to just help center you right here in the now, in the present. You can use count breathing, which is something I suggest a lot, where you breathe in for a certain count and breathe out for a certain count, because that again will help us center our thinking on the numbers. But I think just a simple breath that you take will be very valuable. And tip number 3 is to visualize yourself handling crowd pressure. This is honestly my favorite tip out of the 3, and it's one I've seen a lot of success with when athletes have used it before. So what you want to do with this is you want to visualize yourself handling the crowd pressure well. So you'll put yourself in the situation where you're dealing with the crowd pressure, whether that's because the crowd is really loud or talking trash, booing you, whatever it ends up being. So you'll sit down, and this is done, right, kind of days, as many days as you can before you're going to deal with the crowd pressure. And so you sit down, you close your eyes, you do some breathing to get yourself relaxed, and then you create the scene, right? You imagine the crowd being really loud, talking trash, putting that pressure on you, and then most importantly, you visualize yourself handling it well and performing well. And an example of this comes from a tennis player that I worked with. She was playing on a team, and they were about to play a match against another team who historically has caused them a lot of problems. Yes, because the team themselves was good, but it was mainly because they struggled facing their crowd, because the crowd talked a lot of trash, cheered really loudly for the other team, and then booed them whenever they played. So what I had her do, and then she told her teammates about it, so they did it as well, is that the week leading up to the match, they would spend time every day mentally rehearsing themselves, facing that opponent, facing the crowd, dealing with the crowd, and then performing well in spite of the fact that the crowd was putting a lot of pressure on them. So by the time they came to the actual match, it was nothing new, right? They felt very confident that they could handle the crowd because they weren't relying on the past experiences they've had, which were negative, right? Where they did not perform well dealing with that crowd. They were having confidence because they had spent time every single day for probably 5 or 6 days leading into the match, imagining themselves playing well and dealing with the crowd. And they ended up winning the match. They performed very well, and she said a lot of it had to do with performing this visualization. So that's something that you can do in preparation for a game when you know you'll be dealing with a lot of crowd pressure. And, I know that a lot of times with visualization, we want to imagine things going exactly the way we want to. But we also have to accept the fact of reality. And the reality is, as an athlete, you'll face crowd pressure. So doesn't it make a lot more sense that instead of hoping the crowd pressure won't get to you, you actually spend time mentally rehearsing yourself, dealing with a really, really tough crowd and handling it? Because by the time you face that crowd, you're going to have the feeling of, well, I've handled this before. I know exactly what to do. So that's the third tip that I have for you. So the 3 tips in summary is the first one is you want to make sure that you keep your goals simple during the game. The second one is use your breathing during the game to center yourself back in the present moment. And the third tip is that in preparation for the game, you want to visualize yourself handling the crowd pressure well to give yourself that confidence when it comes to the game that you'll be able to handle it because you've seen yourself do so many times in your mind. Now, I mentioned earlier my one-on-one coaching, and I put a link to that in the description below to learn more. And I also have 2 courses available, the Confident Competitor Academy and the Mentally Tough Kid course. Both of those are linked in the description below as well, along with my 2 books, Mind Games and the Athlete Mental Training book. Those are linked in the description below as well. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.